Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to the first Shaman's Way podcast episode of 2021. I wanted to take just a moment to share some exciting news with you. First, for those looking to get deeper into shamanism, we're going to be focusing on getting some courses out to you. The first will be coming out before spring and will be on the daily tools of shamanism. To make sure you don't miss out on any details, sign up for updates at shamansway.net. Second, we're also exploring some other ideas, including video versions of our podcasts and offering a meditation/journey-specific series in addition to the regular podcasts. There'll be more on that in the next couple of months. So there should be lots of excitement for us here in 2021. Again, head over to shamansway.net, sign up for our newsletter, and you'll receive all the latest updates. Now, without further ado, here is Cricket with today's episode.
Well, hello to my constant listeners. Welcome back to a foray into my mental meanderings. Welcome back again, my semi-constant listener. And as always, I'm going to ask you, I wonder what it is about the title of today's podcast that drew you. To my brand new listener, welcome to Shaman's Way podcast. Today, I want to share with you some of my growing thoughts on shamanism as a daily practice. How can I say I have become more open-minded? My ego isn't constantly looking for its own reflection as I step into a daily practice. So say the words, daily practice. And I swear I can hear the deep groan inside the brain of the human to whom I am speaking. All the while, that beguiling face is smiling and nodding, and I even hear things like, "Oh yeah, I've been meaning to do that," or "Oh yeah, I should get on that," or "Yes, I started it, and then I stopped." Well, I quietly laugh to myself, because I think the last thing we ever want to hear is, "Oh yeah, and then I want you to add this to your already overwhelmed plate. There you go, have fun and do that daily practice." Now, I personally have come a long way in my own relationship to spirit and my view about how others should or should not practice. It taught me quite a bit about my ego and my own need to share shamanism. In the beginning of my practice, upon reflection, I liken it to when I became a born-again Christian. As I would have said back then, I was on fire for the Lord. But now, I was on fire for shamanism, and that same fervent desire to share what I have found as this panacea for soul, I took that as my hail cry. And then I spent years learning even more lessons. I spent many years looking for people who were as doggedly and steadfastly connected to shamanism and all of its practice as I perceived myself to be at that time. But that was ego seeking its own reflection. In time, I have really shifted my view to see the subtleties and the beauties expressed in the differences of practice and the differences of moving with spirit. Around year 5 or 6 into shamanism, I ran into a woman who I had met very early on walking my shamanic path. Maybe I'd met her year 2 or 3. We chatted about where our paths had led us, and she said to me, "Oh, I could not just study shamanism. There is so much more out there to learn." Well, that blew my mental gasket right about there, and all I could think was, what, are you kidding me? Shamanism, it brings in absolutely everything. Here again, see, here's that ego face coming back up. And here is where I would get into my own internal struggle. My struggle was, and even whispers of it still occur. I really have come from standing in the place of, if you cannot settle on one, you will end up deepening nothing. And I cannot say that for absolute certainty now, for I have met many people with a deep understanding of consciousness, humanity, philosophy, and spirit, and have had many opportunities to partake in different spiritual traditions, sometimes in opposition of one another. While that may have been a true reality for me at that time, being so hard and so strong-nosed at that point, I don't feel the same way now. I really believe I've had a rare opportunity to watch humans come and go in my shamanic life. Some stay for one circle, and some of us have circled together for years. I have matured in my thinking and believe there are truly powerful and deep ways to spirit. And many of these powerful and deep ways are not on the spectrum of shamanic practice. And hey, maybe some of you get really fortunate and not have to study something for 30 years and still feel like an apprentice, because I swear sometimes I still feel like an apprentice. Now, I know some of you have heard me use the terms water skiing on the lake of spirituality, and I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. I still see many souls speeding past me onto the next shiny object on their spiritual journey, but that is just it. It is their journey, not mine. When I'm asked, do I need to do a daily practice? Being the person that I am, who attempts to see the medicine wheel from both sides, I have two answers. The answer most of us want to hear, and we need, is yes. It's absolutely wonderful to have a daily spiritual practice, because most of us are very deeply in the world. We get lost very easily into the stuff of life. So to have a practice that keeps reminding you and pulling you back and awakening you again and again, giving you a chance to look at what happened and how you got lost the day before, putting this all into perspective is very useful. Seeking the patterns is very useful. Delving into what is deeply etched into your own reality is very useful. I'm fully aware that the daily practice can become a, do I really have to, reality? And I know for many people it can become like your new diet or going to the gym, and then it just becomes another chore, and you beat yourself up for not doing it. So the challenge of establishing daily practice is universal. It's really the first step on the road to creating a different relationship with your mind. Every single beginner, moderate, and advanced faces the monumental task of establishing and maintaining their practice. There are many ways to spirit and many ways to practice. When you hear your soul say, I have found my practice, it is quite safe to assume that the practice you found may not last you for the rest of your life. At least that is one of the primary lessons I've learned this far. I encourage people to keep in mind they found this practice at just the right time in their life to accept it and to grow with it. And grow you will. Because where you were on the path when you found XYZ, insert your spiritual practice of choice, in the course of deepening the journey within, well, that's going to change you into somebody else. So the path that felt right, so right, initially, may not be appropriate a little way down the line. I was so gung-ho for Reiki when I took my first class in the early 90s. I thought this is the way to go, and once I got to level 2, it was no longer a path for me. And so this, even for me, is a gentle reminder that we need to stay open and leave a little wiggle room in there and heed the delicate and the subtle balances that are going on in you. You know, especially you, constant listener, I place much value on deepening a practice. One of my water spirits teased me one day and said, well, you see, you can't just go around digging shallow wells everywhere and gesturing a hand in the widest of arc. You gotta dig a deep well so that you get fresh water. I loved it. It made absolute sense. And I have used that reference in my mind on a number of different occasions for a number of different ways. But it's really true. There's lots of ways of digging shallow wells. But there really is, if we want to get to the depth of the unconscious, the clarity of the unconscious, the clarity of the self, the growing of the self-mind, the conscious mind, the compassionate voice, you need to get to the fresh water. You need to go far below the surface of self in order to reach that spring of the clearest, cleanest water of soul of self. My prayer practice is, to me, extremely useful in clearing away and letting me see how my mind keeps creating my version of reality. Most traditions require a regular practice or a daily practice to get ahead or to move ahead. There are certainly traditions which require no regular practice, and people do fine. So I can't say it's necessary, but I certainly find it useful. I certainly encourage other people to do it. It's rather delicate, though, because it's important that you practice. Now listen to this, because this was a hard lesson for me. Maybe it's an easy lesson for you, but it's rather delicate because it's important that you practice from a place of really remembering why you're doing it. Also that you're doing it with some joy and some appreciation. You do it from a place of really remembering why you're doing it. If you get into the, I've got to do my practice thoughts, for me that is akin to walking into a temple, only to find that you resent your time and you resent having to do something which has diminishing value to you. Rather than being caught in the feelings of, I ought to do the practice or I'm a bad person. And in the long run, that's not good for the soul or how to build trust between the conscious mind and the sometimes subtle and quiet voice of the soul. I would rather push people away from spiritual practices until they're hungry for them. I would say to you, spiritual practice is wonderful if you want to do it. And if you don't, don't. That isn't to say there isn't value in doing a practice every day, even when you don't want to do it. Trust me, this I know, especially in the shamanic exploration of the soul, because the not wanting to do it is as much grist for the mill of journey work as wanting to do it. It's all the stuff you can work with in the mind. It's a delicate balance that goes on inside oneself, recognizing that if you build up too much of a negative tone towards your practice, too much resistance, you're going to have a reaction to it that's going to take you away from it. One of the things that can really drive us away is seeing the deep wounded self or not being familiar or working with your shadow or that tiny voice that just tries to talk you out of doing this, trying to talk you out of the sacred. Remember, we've talked about being instinct injured. And my constant listeners, I've talked about that. Semi-constant listeners, you may have heard me talk about that. But the brand new listener, you may not know what it means. From my perspective, it really just means operating from a wounded place. So you've normalized the abnormal. The shadow will tell you not to do a daily practice because it really isn't helping anyway. You really can't journey anyway. You really can't see anything anyway. But that's all not true. It's a delicate balance. So recognizing that if you build up too much of a negative tone towards your practice, can you hear the resistance in the words I've said? And can you hear that if those are the ways you think about it, it's going to take you away from it? And it's going to take you a while to come back, if you ever do come back. So be compassionate and be gentle with yourself. This really isn't falling off the path. It's just another part of the path. My guidance this many years in in regards to practice is go slow. Try not to get too gung-ho, and don't figure you're going to be a shaman in a weekend. Relax into it and just start to tune in. There are a myriad of voices coming into you. There are a myriad of thoughts and ideas. And when attempting to find a daily practice, what would that daily practice look like for you? We tend to overthink, overanalyze. Some of us don't, but lots of people do. When we overthink, we often choose a spiritual practice a little before it's time or before it chooses us. And we find ourselves in this ought and should predicament, where you start out with great love and with a little while it becomes, oh my God, I've got to do my practice. And it becomes like another thing, like folding and putting laundry away as soon as it's out of the dryer. Like, who the fuck does that? It's not always happening. Actually, yeah, I do that, but don't tell anyone, because then you look like a weirdo. At this point, you've probably practiced shamanism long enough to feel its benefit. But you're not good about prioritizing it in your days. Maybe, you don't, there's that aspect of when is it passion and when is it obligation. A common mistake is to stress about the fact that you should. In fact, the very mental voice that harasses you is the exact voice you're trying to subdue. So again, we're going back into that shadow. We're going back into the instinct injured. So it makes absolutely no sense to indulge that voice by beating yourself up. It is my compassionate voice or my critical voice. Which one is winning today? Which one has most of my attention? My critical voice or my compassionate voice? Whenever your internal dialogue starts stressing that you're not doing enough, I encourage you to just close your eyes and take a few deep breaths with full, mindful awareness. Breathing helps me to stay present, and that momentary presence is often enough to halt the critical voice in mid-thought. Once the feeling of anxiety passes, I carry on with whatever I'm doing. If I can sit with my breath and stay present for longer than a few breaths, I go for it. So if you can sit with your breath and stay present for longer than a few breaths, go for it. But if not, don't worry about it. I find once I halt or quiet the critical voice, then there's more room for anticipation. There's more room to anticipate merging with spirit. There's less room for feeling angst or frustration. And I know many people will talk about as a daily practice if they get booted out of the journey after a few minutes. Well, then don't criticize yourself about that. If that's the way it is, stop, take a few breaths, come into full mindful awareness, stay present, reconnect, and off you go again. If you're in the middle of prayer and you come out and you start thinking about your grocery list, don't belittle yourself. Take a breath, come back in the moment, and carry on. Subdue that critical voice. The critical voice is cunning because it will quickly mutate into another common excuse. I know you've never used this one, especially you, constant listener. Part of the critical voice. What does it do? It says, oh, shucks, I don't have enough time to do that. Most everyone faces the pitfall of feeling like there's simply not enough time for daily practice. Heck, even a weekly practice. But the sad truth is, the more you feel like you don't have time to connect spiritually, the more you actually need to. No matter how busy you are, you owe it to yourself to make time for silent stillness. Make time for connecting with spirit. I won't use any kind of shaming comparison. Just know that if we try hard enough, we can find time for ourselves. Heck, I bet you, yes you, whose ears into which I speak, have 5 minutes a day that you can give yourself. And oh my gosh, just wait, you might even have 1 hour, 1 evening every 2 weeks to connect more deeply. Oh my gosh. So if your critical voice is resisting your inquisitive desire to journey, then try bargaining with yourself. And I've told you many times, if you're on the journey, create a beautiful chair, park your critical voice inside, say, you sit right there. I'm going to go on my journey. When I come back, I promise I will pick you up and you can tell me all about how what I experienced wasn't real later. But right now, I don't need you. It's a really excellent tool for moving into sacred space, getting the critical voice out of the way, moving into that connection with spirit, that connection into yourself. Eventually, the pleasure of the practice itself will naturally entice you to lengthen your sessions until you're comfortable giving yourself the currency of 20 minutes a day to invest in your spiritual, mental, and physical health. It really is how much value you place on yourself. We all have really full plates, and the very first thing most of us push off is ourselves. We can give to everyone else. We can give to everything else. You've heard this a quadrillion times. But it bears repeating because obviously if you're struggling with a practice, and all of us struggle with a practice, then it is good to be reminded of that. I remember reading a quote from Gandhi, and he was asked how he found time to meditate in between being a husband, a father, a politician, a spiritual guru. It read similar to, when I feel that I am too busy to meditate for 1 hour every day, I meditate for 2 hours. Ultimately, in order to successfully establish a daily practice, you need to change the language your mind uses to conceptualize it. If your mind is convinced daily practice is something you should do, that it's an unpleasant chore or a difficult task that must be accomplished, well, I hate to break it to you, but you've already lost the fight. Instead, realize daily practice is a gift that you give yourself. It is a break, a respite, a private vacation from the world, from your problems, perhaps even yourself. Each time we opt out or skip a daily practice, you're depriving yourself of a much-needed release valve from the continual barrage of information from the outside world and your own mind. As we leave 2020 behind us and we lurch forward into 2021, we need that release valve. We need to make you, my listener, realize just incredibly how valuable you are and how the currency of 20 minutes will seem like a paltry sum once you move to that depth of self and that understanding of self. 20 minutes will feel like that is not even enough time to delve into where I am. For people that I've had contact with through email have experienced a direct connection with the numinous experience, that spiritual experience. And they said they believe in the principles of shamanism, but have wondered how to incorporate it in their daily living. They get the big picture, but they're not sure how to have an active relationship with the spirit world in day-to-day reality. In my mind, there are two key elements that are essential to the practice of shamanism. And these are, number one, using right intention in serving the connection with shamanic experience. 2, engaging in daily practice or ceremony that serves the connection. Intention is the fuel that creates a sense of agency, and the ceremony is the structure that holds the energetic fuel. From a Jungian perspective, intention is the force of the expression of the masculine principle, while ceremony establishes an energetic relationship through daily practice in the feminine dynamic. For things to come together and become integrated, both the masculine and the feminine principles must be present. Now, I want to be clear that this is a principle and not a gendered issue. Focused intent provides the momentum that is manifested through practice. In alchemy, the feminine vessel contains the material to be worked with and transformed. In shamanism, the ceremony is the expression and container that holds the life force. Setting intentions is not just about tangible physical things. It's also about how you operate internally, your internal wealth. When creating an intention, you do not have to define what is this going to look like, or what are you even going to achieve. Indeed, intention is defined as the object for which a prayer, mass, or pious act is offered, a process or manner of healing incised wounds. We begin to recognize how ourselves and others are constantly acting from a place of intention, whether it's positive or negative, conscious or unconscious. Regardless of these factors, intentions set powerful actions into motion, and that can impact all aspects of our lives and those around us. Setting intention is a very personal practice. We look within and determine what you need most that day. Perhaps you're simply needing to cultivate more peace. And what about 5 minutes of just your beautiful rattle beside your ear very gently as you take in nice deep breaths and out with deep breaths, and in and out, and the rattle just clears that conscious mind, allowing you space to connect with that unconscious realm consciously. That is one aspect, or that is one thing that you can do from a daily practice. Maybe it's much more simple and tangible intention, like focusing on your conscious breathing or not being distracted by outside noises. Oftentimes when we journey, especially if we have kids or cats or dogs or spouses or busy street, we are distracted by outside noises. A tangible intention would be, I set space so that I am not distracted by outside noises. One of the cues I give myself is any outside noise or any outside disturbance will only drive to push me deeper into my journey. Those are mental parameters I set for myself in order to help me to stay focused and stay focused on my intentions. Intentions can be simple but carry serious power. Setting an intention to listen more carefully to the compassionate voice, or setting the intention to spend more time with loved ones. Their intention, as you're getting my point, their intention on many different levels. Daily practice can be your opportunity to get quiet, centered, and aware. Use that time to decide what it is you need most of your practice that day. Peace, stress relief, focus, strength, empowerment, acceptance. Obviously, the possibilities are endless, and it is up to you to determine the intention that best serves you in the moment. Intentions show that you are in control of your thoughts, your experience, and your reality. Find times to remind yourself of your intention throughout the day. When you tune into the power of your heart and soul, work out what you need, and then create the intention to bring that energy into your life. It is amazing the type of shifts and changes that can occur. Being able to grow corn or grist for the mill with experience, that refers to the practical application of shamanism. And all of this occurs through the process of integration. This is that being able to make it your own. So in that daily practice, if our daily practice for 1 week for 5 minutes with the rattle is to bring about that conscious relationship to peace, or bring more peace into your body, if we practice this for a number of days, then that becomes an integration process. It works to make it part of our own. If we have an intention for the month, and that intention for the month is I do 1 journey a week, and I will dedicate the journey to XYZ, and perhaps make all of those journeys in that month relate to one single particular issue, problem, or something you're seeking insight into. By doing it multiple times, seeking it from multiple directions, that's a practical application as well. And it does help you with the integration. Having different opinions, different ideas from different spirits, different points of view in your own spirit world, that really helps also to bring it, to make it your own. The exploration through spirit has been a personal exploration. It is the personal explorations that most of us integrate more deeply and can draw upon, rather than the words or the actions or the deeds of another human being. I'm not saying always. I'm saying in general. In our modern world, you know this as well as I know this, that talking to the plants or the mountains, connecting with the spirits of the earth or the water and the wind, it's not usually recommended as a means of navigating our dial-a-day reality. But my grandmother taught me years ago, when I first began to engage with the spirit world, to take what feels right and to put what I don't understand on the shelf. And when I'm ready, take it down off the shelf and examine it. And she has been perfectly right about that. Most of us find our own unique way of knowing what is true for our own self. In my case, because I have an active mind that goes many places, I know if something is true by feeling it in my body, or by examining what my triggers are, my emotional and physiological triggers. Other people may need to see or hear something to know that it exists. I believe that we each find our own truth with the help of our guides and our allies. It is important for us not to rely or depend on the opinions or the visions of other people. If it is our intention to connect, we need to learn to develop our own direct relationship with the shamanic world. We each form our own perception of reality as we walk further on our own individual shamanic path. Daily practice can consist of some very simple actions. If you have the opportunity to light a small tea light candle every day to bring light or bring space or bring peace or bring clarity, whatever that intention would be, then that may be your daily practice. The daily practice of lighting the candle, using your rattle, connecting deep inside, rattling away and shaking away the cobwebs of consciousness so the unconscious mind can rise with deeper nuggets of wisdoms and jewels of consciousness. Another daily practice is to commit to journey every day. If you can't commit to journey every day, then commit to journey every other day. I think the exploration of the mind using the drum and your own connection to spirit is far more valuable than me telling you what to do. As much as you may want me to give you 30 ideas for daily practice, it's invaluable for you to seek out what would be a daily practice for you. What I've learned over the many years of doing this, what I see as valuable and what I see as an important part of my practice, is not necessarily reflected in the eyes, the values, or the practices of any of my students or my friends. Spirit has a distinct language that only you can understand. Spirit has a way of speaking to you that only you can receive. We can all gain understandings and basic lessons. We can all bring all of that to the table. But then it is up to us and you, my dear listener, to sort through all of the gifts, all of the pieces of information, all of the insights and all of the suggestions, put them all on the table, examine them all, and determine which, if any, are yours to keep, which, if any, are yours to use now, and which, if any, are to be put on the shelf, to be called upon another time, another day, another way. I'm very excited to be able to bring to you through Shaman's Way our latest workshop called Daily Tools for Shamanism. It follows a bit on the heels of this particular podcast. So to you, my constant listener, thank you for spending your time with me. And I really do hope that I maybe talked about daily practice in a way that you haven't thought about it before, or perhaps even added more clarity to your own deep thoughts and connections with working with spirit. To my semi-constant listener, I hope that this gave you insight into my perceptions and some of my thoughts on what I think is a positive practice, but simply at the same time recognizing it can be a challenge to have a daily practice. And to my new listener, if you have made it all the way through to now, congratulations and welcome to Shaman's Way. Perhaps we will meet you again. Until next time, Happy New Year and Sayonara.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.